The salt stung my eyes, a familiar discomfort after a day spent riding hard along the coast. We had made landfall in Normandy a fortnight ago, our company a small cog in King Edward's grand war machine, and every day since had been a relentless march eastward. Yet the sea remained a constant companion, its rhythmic crashing a stark counterpoint to the grim silence that often fell over our column. My name is Henry of East Anglia, a name that carries the weight of noble lineage, but offers little solace in the face of war. I am but 19 winters old, my face still smooth save for the faintest hint of a beard that I coax into existence with much effort. My hair, the colour of sun-bleached straw, is hidden beneath a steel helm that already feels like a second skin. Beside me rides Edward, the Black Prince, heir to the English throne, and the man to whom I have sworn my sword. He is but a year my senior, yet he carries himself with a gravitas that belies his age. His dark eyes, so like his father's, miss nothing, and his every word is measured, as if he already bears the crown. "Henry," he says, his voice cutting through the wind, "a penny for your thoughts." I turn to him, a wry smile tugging at my lips. I was merely contemplating the irony of being a knight who was more accustomed to the smell of salt than of manure. Edward chuckles, a surprisingly boyish sound that warms my heart. "Fear not, my friend. You shall have your fill of both before this campaign is over." He falls silent then, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I know what he is thinking. The Battle of Crécy, our first major engagement, had been a victory, but a costly one. We had broken the French lines, but only after a bloody melee that had left many of our comrades slain. The Black Prince had fought like a lion, his courage inspiring us all, but even he had not emerged unscathed. A deep gash on his arm, still healing, serves as a constant reminder of the price of war. As for myself, I had acquitted myself well enough, or so I am told. I had felled a French knight in single combat, a feat that earned me a commendation from the prince himself. But the memory of that man's dying gasp, the terror in his eyes as he realized his life was ebbing away, haunts my dreams. I am a knight, sworn to uphold chivalry and honor, yet I have taken a life. The dissonance between my ideals and my actions gnaws at me, a constant undercurrent of doubt beneath the bravado. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the land. The Black Prince signals for the column to halt, and soon we are making camp for the night. The air is filled with the sounds of men and horses, the clatter of armor, the neighing of steeds, the crackling of fires being lit. I dismount, my legs stiff from the long ride, and hand my horse over to a squire. As I walk towards the prince's tent, I catch snippets of conversation. The men are talking of Crécy, a small town not far from here. It is said that the French army, led by King Philip himself, is massing there, intent on barring our path. A shiver runs down my spine. Crécy. The name has an ominous ring to it, like the tolling of a funeral bell. I find the Black Prince sitting on a camp stool, a map spread out before him. He looks up as I approach, his face etched with concern. "Henry," he says, "we must speak." I kneel before him, my heart pounding. What news does he have? Has a messenger arrived with orders? Is the battle upon us? "The king has received intelligence," the Black Prince continues, his voice grave. "The French army outnumbers us 3-1. They are confident of victory." I feel a knot tighten in my stomach. 3-1. Those are daunting odds, even for the bravest of knights. "But we have the advantage of surprise," the Black Prince says, his voice hardening. "And we have you, Henry. I trust you implicitly. I need you to be my eyes and ears. Scout ahead, learn everything you can about the French positions, their strengths, their weaknesses. Bring me back information that will help us win this battle." I nod, my resolve hardening. This is my chance to prove my worth, to repay the prince's trust. I will not fail him. "You have my word, my prince," I say, my voice ringing with determination. "I will not rest until I have fulfilled your command." The following day, a heavy fog clung to the Norman countryside as I set out, accompanied by a small contingent of skilled riders. We rode under the prince's banner, a symbol of authority that could as easily attract danger as deflect it. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, put my senses on high alert. I had never been a scout before, but I had learned to read the land from my father, a seasoned hunter. By midday, the fog began to lift, revealing a landscape scarred by war. Burned villages, trampled fields, and hastily dug graves were grim reminders of the conflict's toll. We pressed on, our eyes peeled for any sign of the French army. As we crested a hill, I saw it. The sprawling encampment of the French, a sea of tents and banners stretching across the plain. A thrill of fear, mingled with excitement, surged through me. I had found them. We dismounted, tethered our horses in a hidden copse, and crept closer on foot. The French were a formidable sight. Their numbers alone were overwhelming, their ranks filled with knights in gleaming armor and foot soldiers bristling with weapons. But as I watched them, I noticed a certain disorder, a lack of discipline that surprised me. The knights, proud and arrogant, seemed more interested in boasting and drinking than in preparing for battle. The foot soldiers were poorly equipped, many of them mere peasants conscripted into service. The crossbowmen, Geno's mercenaries renowned for their skill, were quarrelling with their French commanders. I spent the rest of the day observing the French, taking note of their formations, their supplies, their morale. As darkness fell, I crept back to my men, my mind racing with the information I had gathered. We rode through the night, reaching the English camp just as dawn was breaking. I found the Black Prince still awake, his face drawn with worry. He listened intently as I recounted my observations, a glimmer of hope replacing the despair in his eyes. "You have done well, Henry," he said, clasping my shoulder. "Very well. Your information is invaluable. It seems the French are overconfident, complacent. They believe their numbers alone will guarantee victory." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But we will prove them wrong. We will show them the true strength of English arms." A surge of pride swelled in my chest. I had done my duty, fulfilled my promise. Now it was up to the Prince, to King Edward, to lead us to victory. But a nagging doubt remained. Would it be enough? Could we truly defeat an army 3 times our size? The Black Prince seemed to read my thoughts. "Do not lose heart, Henry," he said. "We may be outnumbered, but we are not outmatched. We have the advantage of the terrain, the skill of our archers, and the courage of our men. And we have God on our side." He smiled, a faint but reassuring smile. "Now get some rest, my friend. Tomorrow will be a day that will go down in history." The night before the battle was a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The camp was abuzz with activity, yet an eerie silence hung in the air. Men sharpened their swords, polished their armor, and prayed to their God, each in their own way seeking solace and strength. I found myself drawn to a nearby hill, away from the noise and bustle. The moon bathed the landscape in an ethereal glow, casting long shadows that danced and twisted in the breeze. Below, I could see the faint outline of the French camp, a sleeping giant unaware of the storm that was about to break. I thought of my family back in East Anglia, my mother, my father, my younger sister. Would they be proud of me? Or would they be mourning my loss, cursing the war that had taken their son and brother? I thought of the Black Prince, his trust, his courage, his unwavering belief in our cause. I thought of the French knights, their arrogance, their complacency, their blind faith in their numbers. And I thought of the ordinary soldiers, both English and French, who would die on the morrow, their lives sacrificed on the altar of ambition and pride. A wave of sadness washed over me. Was this what it meant to be a knight? To kill and be killed, to serve a cause that seemed increasingly distant and abstract? I closed my eyes, trying to find peace in the stillness of the night. But the only sound I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, a steady drumbeat that echoed the approaching battle. As dawn approached, I returned to the camp. The men were already stirring, their faces grim but determined. The Black Prince was inspecting the lines, his armor gleaming in the early morning light. He saw me and beckoned me over. "Henry," he said, his voice low and intense, "today is the day. Today we will make history." He handed me a sealed scroll. "This is for your family," he said, "in case I do not return." I took the scroll, my throat tightening. "My prince," I said, "I will not fail you." He smiled, a sad but resolute smile. "I know you won't, Henry. Now go. Take your place in the line, and may God be with you." I mounted my horse and rode to join my comrades. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the field. The air was still and silent, the only sound the occasional whinny of a horse or the clink of armor. The tension was palpable. Every man knew what was at stake. Our lives, our country, our future. The Black Prince raised his hand, a signal for silence. Then, in a clear voice that rang across the field, he cried, "For England, for St. George, charge!" And with a roar that shook the very earth, we charged towards the French lines. The Battle of Crécy had begun. A wave of anticipation washed over the battlefield as the Genoese crossbowmen, their weapons glinting ominously in the afternoon sun, were ordered forward. Their advance was a slow, deliberate march, each step heavy with the weight of expectation. I watched them from my position on the flank, a mixture of awe and trepidation swirling within me. These mercenaries were renowned for their skill, their crossbows capable of piercing armor at a distance. They were a formidable weapon in the French arsenal, a threat that could not be ignored. The Genoese reached their designated position and unleashed a volley of bolts towards the English lines. The air was filled with a deadly symphony of twanging strings and whistling projectiles. But their shots fell short, hampered by the muddy terrain and the rain that had fallen earlier in the day. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the French ranks. The Genoese, their confidence shaken, reloaded their weapons and fired again. This time, their bolts reached their targets, but the impact was minimal. The English archers, protected by their shields and the sloping ground, suffered few casualties. The Black Prince, sensing an opportunity, gave the order for our longbowmen to return fire. A hail of arrows arced through the air, a deadly rain that descended upon the Genoese with devastating effect. The mercenaries, caught in the open and lacking adequate protection, were decimated. The survivors, panic-stricken, turned and fled, their retreat causing chaos and confusion in the French lines. The Black Prince seized the moment, his voice booming across the battlefield. "For England, for St. George, charge!" A roar erupted from our ranks as we surged forward, a wave of disciplined fury crashing against the already faltering French lines. The first clash was a deafening cacophony of steel on steel, the screams of men and horses mingling with the relentless thunder of hooves. I found myself swept up in the maelstrom, my sword flashing as I parried blows and struck out at the enemy. The French knights, already shaken by the Genoese retreat, were further hampered by the muddy terrain and the relentless rain of arrows from our longbowmen. Their horses, spooked and injured, stumbled and fell, throwing their riders into the mud. The ground quickly became a treacherous mire of blood and broken bodies, the air thick with the stench of sweat and fear. I fought with a ferocity I never knew I possessed, my mind focused on survival, my heart pounding in my chest. I saw the Black Prince in the thick of the fight, his sword a blur as he cut down one foe after another. His courage was infectious, inspiring his men to fight with even greater determination. The battle raged for hours, a brutal dance of death and destruction. The sun reached its zenith and began to descend, casting long shadows across the bloodied field. Still, we fought on, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope for victory. As the day wore on, the French launched a series of desperate cavalry charges. Their knights, clad in heavy armor and mounted on powerful steeds, thundered towards our lines, their lances lowered and their battle cries echoing across the field. The sight was a terrifying spectacle, a wall of iron and flesh bearing down upon us with relentless force. For a moment, I felt a surge of panic, the instinct for self-preservation rising within me. But then I looked to my left and saw the Black Prince, his face resolute, his sword held high. His courage steadied my nerves, reminded me of my duty, of my oath to fight for king and country. The first wave of French knights crashed into our lines, their lances splintering against shields and armor. The impact was immense, the ground trembling beneath our feet. But the English line held, a testament to the discipline and training of our men. The French knights, hampered by the muddy terrain and the rain of arrows from our longbowmen, struggled to maintain their formation. Their horses, wounded and terrified, reared and bucked, throwing their riders to the ground. I watched as the Black Prince engaged in a fierce duel with a French knight, their swords clashing in a deadly dance. The prince, despite his youth, was a skilled swordsman, his movements swift and precise. He parried the knight's blows with ease, his counterattacks finding their mark with deadly accuracy. The French knight, realizing he was outmatched, attempted to retreat. But the prince was too quick for him, his sword piercing the knight's armor and finding his heart. The knight slumped from his saddle, his lifeblood staining the mud. The sight of the Black Prince's victory galvanized our forces. With renewed vigor, we pushed back against the French, our swords flashing in the dying light. The tide of the battle had turned. The French, their ranks broken and their morale shattered, began to retreat. Their once proud cavalry, now a disorganized rabble, fled across the field, pursued by our archers and men-at-arms. As darkness fell, the Battle of Crécy was won. The English, against all odds, had triumphed over a vastly superior force. But the victory was not without cost. The field was littered with the dead and dying, their broken bodies a testament to the brutality of war. I stood amidst the carnage, my sword still clutched in my hand. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the battle was now fading, replaced by a deep exhaustion and a profound sense of loss. I had survived, but at what cost? I looked around at my fellow soldiers, their faces etched with the same mixture of triumph and sorrow that I felt. We had won a great victory, but we had also paid a terrible price. The scars of this day would remain with us forever, a constant reminder of the horrors we had witnessed. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of utter devastation. The once pristine fields of Crécy were now a grotesque tableau of death and destruction. The stench of blood and decay hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the horrors that had transpired. I wandered through the wreckage, my senses numbed by the sheer scale of the carnage. Bodies lay strewn across the battlefield, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and agony. The sight was so overwhelming, so horrific, that I could barely comprehend it. I stumbled upon a group of English soldiers tending to the wounded. Their faces were etched with exhaustion, their hands stained with blood. They worked tirelessly, their movements swift and efficient, but the task was immense. There were simply too many wounded, too many dying. I offered my help, but they waved me away, their eyes pleading with me to find someone else to assist. I turned away, feeling helpless and ashamed. I was a knight, a warrior, but I was powerless to alleviate the suffering around me. As I walked on, I saw a small group of French prisoners being escorted to the rear. Their heads were bowed, their shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a pang of pity for them. They were soldiers, just like me, caught up in a conflict they did not understand. I came upon a scene that will forever be etched in my memory. A young French boy, no more than 12 years old, lay on the ground, his body riddled with arrows. He was still alive, but his breathing was shallow, his eyes glazed over with pain. I knelt beside him, my heart aching for his suffering. I gently removed his helmet, revealing a face that was both beautiful and tragic. His skin was pale, his lips tinged with blue, his eyes filled with a terror that transcended words. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers grasping at the air. I took his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a silent plea for help. I wanted to tell him that everything would be okay, that he would be all right. But the words died in my throat. I knew that there was nothing I could do for him, that his life was slipping away. He closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. His grip on my hand weakened, and then, with a final gasp, he was gone. I sat there for a long time, holding his hand, my mind numb with grief. The boy's death was a stark reminder of the cruelty and futility of war. It was a senseless waste of life, a tragedy that could never be undone. As the days turned into weeks, the full impact of the Battle of Crécy began to sink in. The victory celebrations were muted, overshadowed by the staggering loss of life. The names of the fallen were etched onto makeshift memorials, their memories honored with solemn ceremonies and hushed prayers. The Black Prince, though hailed as a hero, seemed burdened by the weight of his triumph. The youthful exuberance that had once characterized him was replaced by a somberness that reflected the heavy cost of war. He spent hours in his tent, poring over maps and reports, planning the next phase of the campaign. I, too, struggled to reconcile the exhilaration of victory with the grim reality of the battlefield. The image of the young French boy, his life cut short by senseless violence, haunted my dreams. I questioned the righteousness of our cause, the morality of our actions. One evening, as I sat by the campfire, lost in thought, the Black Prince approached me. He sat down beside me, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. "Henry," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I have been thinking a lot about the battle, about the men we lost." He paused, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't help but feel responsible for their deaths. I led them into battle. I gave the orders that sent them to their doom." I reached out and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "My prince," I said, "you cannot blame yourself. We all knew the risks when we took up arms. We fought for our king, for our country, for a cause we believed in." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "I know, Henry, I know. But it doesn't make the pain any less real. The guilt, the regret, it weighs heavily on my heart." I remained silent, knowing that there were no words that could truly comfort him. The burden of leadership was a heavy one, and the Black Prince was learning that lesson the hard way. The following morning, we broke camp and resumed our march towards Calais. The mood was somber, the usual banter and laughter replaced by a quiet determination. We knew that the war was far from over, that there would be more battles, more bloodshed. As we rode, I thought of the young French boy, his lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. I vowed that I would never forget him, that his death would not be in vain. I would fight for a better future, a world where such senseless violence would no longer be necessary. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but I knew that I would not face it alone. I had the Black Prince by my side, a leader who, despite his flaws and doubts, was determined to see this conflict through to the end. And so, with heavy hearts but unwavering resolve, we rode on towards Calais, our destiny intertwined with the fate of two nations locked in a bloody and protracted struggle. The Battle of Crécy was behind us, but its shadow loomed large, a constant reminder of the sacrifices we had made and the challenges that still lay ahead. The weeks leading up to the siege of Calais were a blur of forced marches, skirmishes, and preparations for the inevitable confrontation. We laid waste to the surrounding countryside, cutting off supply lines and isolating the city from any hope of reinforcement. The Black Prince, hardened by the realities of war, oversaw the siege with a ruthless efficiency. He ordered the construction of siege towers, catapults, and trenches, determined to break the city's defenses through sheer force of will. I found myself caught in a strange dichotomy. I had become a hardened warrior, skilled in the arts of combat and siege warfare. Yet, the innocence of my youth had not entirely faded. I still dreamt of my family, of my home, of a life beyond the battlefield. One night, as I stood watch on the ramparts, overlooking the beleaguered city, a wave of melancholy washed over me. I thought of the French citizens trapped inside, their lives disrupted by the war, their futures uncertain. I thought of the English soldiers, many of them mere boys, who had died at Crécy, their lives cut short before they had barely begun. I questioned the purpose of it all, the endless cycle of violence and bloodshed. Was this truly the destiny of mankind, to forever be locked in conflict, driven by ambition and greed? A shooting star streaked across the sky, a fleeting moment of beauty in a world of ugliness. I made a silent wish, a prayer for peace, for an end to the suffering. The following morning, as the siege engines began their assault, I knew that my wish would not be granted any time soon. The war would rage on, claiming countless lives in its wake. But I also knew that I would not give up hope. I would continue to fight for a better future, a world where the horrors of war would be a distant memory. As I stood on the ramparts, watching the siege of Calais unfold, I realized that the war had changed me, perhaps irrevocably. But it had not broken me. I was still Henry of East Anglia, a knight of England, sworn to uphold honour and justice. And as long as there was breath in my body, I would continue to fight for those ideals, no matter the cost.